All right, so the topic today is layers, and you're also doing something called layering. So this is a way of taking a drawing and breaking it down. You can think of it as multiple drawings. Okay. So we've been drawing some pretty complex stuff, like for instance that power pole with the insulators and the cross arms and all of that. But currently, that's all on like one sheet of paper. Okay. But you could have your insulators, say, on their own sheet of paper, the cross arm on its own, the pole on its own, and you can bring these guys all together so that you can see them together. Okay. The beauty of being able to do this is to get multiple drawings out of a single drawing. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing we can do is begin to talk about properties. So properties such as color, line type, line weight, okay, visibility. All right, we can turn things on or off. And they also use another state of visibility called freezing and thawing. So we're gonna look at those. We can also tell it to plot certain layers and not other layers. So people that utilize AutoCAD at a high level, layers is the name of the game. Everything you're doing is layer based. Okay. So it's not unusual to have, say, 200 layers in a drawing, maybe 1,000 layers in a drawing. So for instance, you could think of if you were mapping something out in the real world, you could have, you got your pavement, that could be on a layer, your center line could be on a layer, your sanitary sewer could be on a layer, your trees could be on a layer, sidewalk on a layer, buildings on a layer. You get the idea? I mean, to infinity. So what we do is we fracture that out, and then we can look at subsets of that drawing. So we're gonna look at how do we create layers, what are their properties, how do we manipulate them, and then we'll look at object properties. So object properties mimic layer properties. Okay. So in other words, there is an object color and a layer color. So you can't have two things going on at one time. So one will override the other, as we'll see here in a minute. Okay. And then the other thing we're going to try to do is take a look at text today. Okay. So text is not a really hard concept. If I don't finish that today, I may finish that on Tuesday with you. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at layers. I'm going to jump into a new drawing. I suggest you do the same. Okay. So if you're working on a drawing, don't work on that same drawing, okay? So layers, if you're on the home tab up here, over here we have a whole panel that's called layers. And notice there's quite a few commands, layer properties. And then you have this guy that's a drop down. This is called your layer control manager, manager. This is actually your layer properties manager here. And then you have some subsets like turning layers on, turning them off, freezing them, locking them. So there's a lot of different states that we can do. And there's some other commands. If we go down here, we'll see that there's some other things associated with layers as well. Okay. So what we're going to do is go to the layer properties manager first. And this is where you typically create your layers and manipulate their properties. And one thing about that, I guess I should mention, there really is no limitation to the layers you can have. That's what AutoCAD says, but there actually is. It's like 42,000 or something like that. So I mean, for all intent and purpose, you would not want to have a drawing that has like that many layers. And there is always a layer in AutoCAD. So it's kind of like the piece of paper you're drawing, and we didn't create it, but it's there. It's called the zero layer. So we're going to take a look at that one and then move on. So we're going to go to this guy called layer properties. You want to click on this, open up this dialog box. This dialog box will float out. This dialog box is also resizable, unlike some of them. So what we're going to do is take and resize this guy like this and like that. Okay, just to get it a little bit bigger. And then what we're looking at are the properties of this layer. So what I'm going to do is notice up here, I'm going to open these up a little bit so I can see them. So when you get that double-headed arrow, you can just, whoops, it's not letting me drag. Let me see why that's not letting me drag it. Okay, it says I'm in a command. Hold on a minute. I think I'm in another command. You should be able to resize those. So let's see. Okay, there we go. So that you can read them. I'm just opening them up so that you can read them, okay? And we're going to look at all those properties, except there's a couple we won't look at. So let's see. Missing one in there. There should be. Oh, there it is. Okay. So notice, all right, all layers have properties, and here's their properties, okay? So we're going to go through these one at a time. The first thing is the name of the layer, okay? All layers that you create have a name. Now, notice there's a layer in there called the zero layer, okay? The zero layer is always there. You can never get rid of it. You can never rename it. You can change its other properties, but you can't change its name, and you can't get rid of it. Any other layer that you create can have any name you want associated with it. But AutoCAD will just call it layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4 as you create them generically, and then you can go back and rename them. So I suggest when you get your layers, you name your layers coincident with something that's going to be on that layer. For instance, waterline. So if I name my layer waterline, then I know what's on that layer should be water lines or building or tree. You get the idea? Okay. I used to do it when I first started AutoCAD. I just called them layer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 weeks later, I'd come back to that drawing and, well, what the heck's on layer 2? I don't know. So I'd have to figure it out. Okay. The name can be up to 256 characters. It can be alphanumeric, space, underscore, $, hyphen, but you can't use a slash or a backslash because those are switch characters in Windows. Okay, so it won't let you do that. All right. So then we get to the color. Color is the next big thing. Each layer that you create you can assign a color to it, and if you put objects on that layer, then they will inherit that color. So if I make the color red, and that's the layer I'm working on, all those objects are going to be red. If I make it blue, they're going to be blue. Okay, get the idea? Okay. Let's look at that colors. Colors. If you click on this box, notice it says white. If you just click on that, it'll open up this image tile. Gives you those colors. Is everybody getting that to show up? There's 3 ways of doing it, what they call the index colors, the true colors, or the color books. So AutoCAD says they have 16.7 million colors associated with this. Now in this index color, you only have 255, I believe. Okay. But if you go to true colors, you can mix the hue, the saturation, the luminescence, or RGB, whatever, and you can get, notice we take that slider, you can slide that around, okay? So I usually just use the index colors. And within the index color, notice this square right there, this area right here, it starts with red and it goes over here to gray. The first 7 of those guys are called the 7 standard colors. And they're called standard because they work the same way on everybody's computer. If you have a different graphics card in your computer, the colors up in here may not be the same thing as the colors in mine. But the 7 colors will always be the same. The other thing about those 7 standard colors is they have a number, 1, 2, 3, 4 as I go left to right, and they have a name, red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, magenta, and white. So everything from 1 to 7 has a name and a number. Everything past 7 is just a number. Okay? So a lot of times I just use those 7 standard colors because I know when I click on red, I'm getting red. And everybody else that gets my file will get red. Okay? But if I pick a color up here, it might be kind of a purplish or pink, but it may be some other color in another person's graphics. So it just depends, okay? All right, so there's your colors. All right, the other thing we have are these guys called line types. All right, so line types, if you click on that, Line types are a way of taking a line and breaking it up into a pattern of spaces and lines. Okay? And it, like color, can be used to convey information. So if I see a line that's broken up into a particular pattern of spaces and lines, it might represent what we call a center line. It might represent what we call a hidden line or a dashed line. These are other ways of conveying information to the user. Okay? How many line types you guys have in your drawing right now? Just one, right? Okay. That's called the continuous line type. The reason is we have to load line types into the drawing. So colors are there on demand. You can grab them anytime you want. The line types you have to load into the drawing that you're working on. So here's how you do it. It's really simple. Notice if you've clicked on that line type area, we're in the select line type. There's none in this drawing except continuous. Go down below where it says load, and it'll open up this. This takes you to the AutoCAD.lin file. That's your line type library. What you do is you select the line types you want to load down here, and it'll bring them into your drawing. Okay? Here's what I do, because I don't want to go out and keep grabbing line types. I just load them all. They're really small. So all you got to do is take your cursor down into that area right there, right-click, hit Select All, they highlight, and then just hit OK. And guess what you did? You just loaded all of those into your drawing file now. So now those are in this drawing file, and they're there for you to be able to use. Does everybody see that? So notice we got quite a few alphabetically. There's these ISO types. Those are typically metric kind. We get down here, batting, border. There's some pretty cool ones. We're going to play with these a little bit. But you'll see there's some pretty neat ones, okay? So we're going to go ahead and hit cancel, but we've loaded them, okay? The property right next to this guy is called a line weight, okay? You click on that, you'll notice it opens this box. So this is kind of like polylines. So at one time in AutoCAD, the only way you could give an object width was through a polyline width. Now all objects can have line weight placed on them. Okay? And by the way, that includes text. So some text objects will take on line weights, which means they can get fuzzy and you won't even read them. So these are line weights. Okay? All right, we'll talk about those here in a minute. All right, so color, line type, line weight, those are visual kind of things. Those are going to make it, you know, they're going to pop out at you. All right, so then let's look at over here where it says on and freeze. Okay. On is allowing you to turn your layers on or off. Freeze is freezing them or thawing them. Okay. If a layer is on, you can see it. If it's off, you can't. If a layer is thawed, you can see it. If it's frozen, you can't. Okay. So visually, they look the same. But from a standpoint of what they're really doing is they're different. If you turn a layer off, you cannot see the layers, but you can still select the object on those layers. So that's dangerous. Because I can turn layers off and go out there and think I'm not selecting objects and still selecting them. So that's dangerous. If you freeze a layer, all of the objects on that layer are invisible, but they're also protected. Okay? So if you have a choice between the two, on, off, freeze, thaw, I normally use freeze, thaw because besides allowing me to deal with visibility, I also protect my objects so I can't select them. There is something that's a little bit different between the two. A layer that is current, and I didn't mention this, but if you have 20 layers in there, only one of them can be current. That means you can only draw on one piece of paper at a time. If a layer is current, it cannot be frozen. If a layer is current, it cannot be frozen. If a layer is current, it can be turned off, which means you're drawing like this. you're drawing with blinders on, okay? So there is a big difference, okay? The ultimate protection to layers is this guy right here called lock. So if you lock a layer, the layer cannot be edited. Now what I mean by that is you really can't select objects, okay? So you can draw on a locked layer, but you can't delete on a locked layer, okay? You can draw on it, but you can't delete it. You can't fillet it. You can't trim it because you can't select objects. You can add them, but you can't delete. You can't modify them, all right? If it's locked, you can still see the objects. It can be current. And what's really cool, you can O-snap those objects. So if I want to get to the midpoint of this line and he's locked, I can still get to him. Okay. All right, so that's kind of a neat process. I mentioned first to visibility with on-off freeze thaw. What you see on the screen is what the printer sees. Okay. So if you turn layers off or you freeze those layers will not show up on the printer. Okay. So what you see is what you get. They call that WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. All right. But this guy right here will change that. That's this guy called plot. So this plot is what they call plot, no plot. So what this allows me to do is have a layer visible on the screen, but invisible to the printer. Okay? So if you set that to a no plot state, it won't print on the printer. And we're going to show you all how all these work. Okay? So the last one we'll talk about there is that thing called transparency. So if an object is truly opaque, like this paper, you can't see through it, you can't see my cell phone, right? But you could make it, if you put a plastic sheet in there, you could see my cell phone through it. So what we can do is give these guys transparency. If it's 0, it's completely opaque, you can't see it. So that's got the highest level, it's going to be like this. You can set this anywhere from 0 to 90, which basically allows you to see anything through it. Okay? And you can also plot transparencies. At one time, you couldn't do that. So I'm going to show you how that works because that's a really cool feature. Okay? So here's what we're going to do. While we're in this box, we're going to create some layers. So the way you create a layer is you go click on this little tool up here. It says New Layer. You just click it. Notice it created a new layer. Do it again. Another layer. Do it again. And do it again. Okay? And notice as you do that, they all have the same properties. They're all on, they're all fold, they're all white, they're all continuous. Okay? Everything's the same right now. All right, so we're going to start to mix this up. So we're going to click on layer 1 here. And by the way, if you wanted to change the name, you can just click on the name, and then you can just type in what you want. Okay? So I'm going to go to the color, and we're going to make layer 1 color 1, and then hit OK. So notice now it says, hey, you're ready. Okay? We're going to go over to the line type where it says continuous, and let's pick a different line type. Let's make that what we call a center line type. So notice center line is a long dash, a space, a short dash, a space, a long dash. So that's just a repeating pattern. Okay? So we're going to hit OK, and it should now say center. Right? Is that good? Anybody questions? All right. Go to layer 2. Yes.
Sorry, I think I missed some stuff.
All right. No problem. We'll get it fixed. You gotta go to continuous line type. Up on layer 1. Layer 1. Click on all continuous. And you never loaded them. So go to load. Right click. Select all. Hit OK. Now they're in your drawing. Yes. What's wrong? You moved this guy. Okay. All right, so we're going to grab another color. We're going to go to layer 2. Click on the color box. Let's make this green. Okay, so we're going to make that green. And let's make this line type. We're going to look at this. This one's pretty cool. We're going to use zigzag. So it's at the bottom. Zigzag. Green zigzag. That's number 2. So we're going to go to layer 3. Let's make that guy cyan, which is that kind of light blue. And we'll make his line type gas line. So this one's kind of neat because it's going to have the word gas in it. Okay. And we're going to layer 4, color, blue. And for the line type, let's make that, we're just picking them out. So I'm just going to make that phantom. Phantom. Okay. So you technically can go with anything you want. Now, when I start getting you guys into drawings, I'm going to give you guys a definite color scheme and a line type scheme so that everybody's following the same format. And if you work for a company, that's what they're going to do for you too. They're going to say, hey, we always need to be doing it this way, with this color, with this line type, with this, and this object has to go on that. That's enforcing standards so that everybody does it the same way, okay? You wouldn't want one person in your company doing the walls red and another person doing them yellow, okay? That would be bad, all right? So we like it all be constant. Okay, so notice also, if you double click on the name, do you notice that little green check goes on that layer? So if I double click on layer 4, that green check appears. Double click back on 0, it appears. That is the way to set your layers current. If it's checked, it's current. That means that's the layer you're drawing on. You can't have 2 checked at one time. Okay? It's only one or the other. All right, so let's set the 0 layer current. Go ahead and close this box. Notice on the layer control dialog box right here now, if you drop this down, there's your layers, okay? There's your colors, and there's a few settings. You cannot create layers in that box, but you can set some things up in it pretty nicely. So that's a cool little box. I'm going to show you how to use that pretty much, okay? All right, so it should say layer 0 is your current layer. That's showing up right there. That's your layer, that's your current. Okay, so let's go out and draw a couple of objects. Don't worry about what they are or where they are. I'm just going to draw a line, a couple of lines like that, a couple of circles, maybe a rectangle. But you notice, as you're drawing, those objects are taking on the property of that layer. White, continuous, okay? Is that good? So now we're going to change the layer to a new layer. The easiest way to do that, open up this little box and just click on layer 1. He now just became the current layer. So now watch what happens as we draw objects. I'm going to draw an arc. There's an arc. There's a nice P line zipping around. Put a circle in. You notice now what's going on. Those objects are red, and they also have that line type look to them. Now what's really cool about a line type, the line type is not actually broken up. Okay? Would it help if I turn those off? Would it? Okay. I just noticed that. Sorry. Is that any better? You could also knock those down a little bit if you want. But you can see the line types. Notice this actually looks like it has a space in it, but it really doesn't. That's just what they call a mat. Yeah, that might help. Thank you. Okay? Is that good? All right, let's change layers. Go to layer 2. That's much better, isn't it? Okay, so layer 2 is green. So if I do a circle, this is a zigzag. Wow. Look at that line type. That line type's bizarre. Now that's a circle, but actually that's the way the zigzag looks. If I draw a line from the endpoint of that to the endpoint of that, to the endpoint of that. It's zigzag too. Rectangle, also zigzag, okay? So line types are kind of strange, and that one is, okay? Got the idea? Let's do a couple more. Layer 3. Layer 3 is blue. I believe it was a gas line. So I'm going to draw a line from here to the center of that and out and to the. So notice this line type actually has the word gas inserted. That's pretty cool. Again, any object that you tend to draw is going to have those on it if it can fit it. So if it can't fit it for some reason, it won't put it. But notice there's your lines, okay? So everybody see that? All right, so we're going to do one more here. One more. Go to layer 4. And this one is a phantom, I believe. So it's going to have 2 spaces. And again, we're just doodling around. It doesn't really make any sense, but it will once you start to use these. But you can see there's your color scheme. There's your line type. And you can see now, hopefully, that this is really starting to make your drawing change in terms of the, what's going on there. All right, just get a couple of more objects down so that we can display this thing, okay? So there's my lips. So there's my drawing, okay? We got the colors, we got the line types. What's really cool about this now is that these objects are all on separate layers. So now we're going to look at visibility, okay? So visibility, remember, comes in 2 forms. This light bulb on here is on off. That little sun is freeze thaw. So let's drop this guy down and turn off layer 0. So you just click on that and notice what was on layer 0 disappeared. If I turn off layer 1, it disappears. Layer 2, layer 3, and I can even turn off layer 4, which is the current layer, but it's going to give me this message. You're going to turn off the layer that's current. Do you really want to do this? If you do this, you can draw, but you don't know that you're drawing, okay? So it's not a good idea, okay? So notice, by doing that, we really have a different drawing here, don't we? I mean, really, if you just wanted to print out your gas line for somebody, you could just go to the layer that the gas line was on, which I think was that guy. Nope, wrong one. Maybe it was that one. Yep. And I could turn off all the other ones that I don't need. So I can actually just give pieces of the drawing away based on what I need another person to see, right? And that's kind of the thing that makes CAD different from manual drafting. Because you can't do that in manual drafting. The only way you can do that is erase objects. Okay, and then you're erasing your picture, right? So everybody seen how this works? Let's go turn everything on. Let's freeze them. So if you freeze objects, freeze it, freeze it. When you freeze it, it looks the same, but when you try to freeze the current layer, you're going to get this message. That the layer is current, so it cannot be frozen. Okay? So I could turn the current layer off, cannot freeze the current layer. Okay? So there's a big difference. Also, any layer that is turned frozen is protecting the objects on that layer. I want to show you that. Okay. So right now, we froze these, right? Froze them. How many objects do I have here? It looks like 1. That's 1. That's 2, 3. Maybe 5 or 6. So if I go out and say erase and type in the word all and hit enter, it's only found 7 objects. Now there's like probably 40 or so objects on that drawing, but it only found the ones that are visible. Okay, everybody see that? I want to show you the difference. I'm going to thaw everything, and I'm going to freeze everything or turn everything off, except the current layer. Now if I type erase and the word all, it found 24 objects. So not only the objects that are visible, but the objects that are invisible got selected. Would this be dangerous? Yep, I could delete my whole drawing, right? If I'm not careful, okay? So in general, I guess if you have a choice between those two kind of options, I would tend to use freestyle over on off, okay? Right? All right, so far we good? Is everybody? Okay, so here's a question. Maybe, did anybody wonder, what if I get the object on the wrong layer? Let's say I drew it on layer 0, but I really want it on layer 4. Did anybody think about that? Well, here's the way we do it. There's a couple ways. The easiest way is to just select the objects that you want to move from one layer to another, and then you go up to that layer control dialog box and you click it. So notice I'm going to select on this white circle, and it tells me what layer it's on. It says, hey, he's on layer 0, and I'm going to click on that one, and he's also on layer 0, so it shows me up here. If I want to move that to another layer, I just open this up and say, oh, let's take that to layer 3. And once I do that, notice it moved it from layer 0 to layer 3. Okay? So no object can exist on 2 layers at the same time. So we actually moved it from one layer to another. Okay? That's what we're doing. So we can move them back and forth. All right? Another way to do that is to use what's called properties. I'll show you properties here in a minute. But that's the easiest way to do it. Okay? The easiest way to do it, click on the object, go to the layer control dialog box, and then click on the layer that you want it to be to. Now I want to show you something else that's really important. If I take this object and I'm moving from that layer to that layer, do you notice how he's still highlighted here? He's still highlighted. That means he's still active. So what you want to do is, after you move it, you want to deselect it by hitting the escape key. That way you'll make sure that you don't do anything else to it that you shouldn't be doing to it, like moving it or erasing it or doing something like that. Because that would be real easy to do. Okay? That would be real easy to do. Everybody with me on that? Okay. So we have looked at on off, freeze thaw, color, and line type. So let's take a look at locking. So notice you can lock in here, but you can also lock in here. So I'm going to go ahead and lock layer 4 and layer 3. Okay. Now when you lock it, you might have noticed, if you're doing this with me, you'll notice that it gets dimmer. So that's telling you this is locked, showing you that it's locked. If you take your cursor up to one of those objects that is locked, a little lock pops out. It says, hey, he's locked. He's not. So if you try to select that object, it looks like it's selected, but if I hit the delete key, it ignores it. It tells me even at the bottom there, the one that you selected is locked. So if I come over here and select the objects this way, it selects everything but the locked objects. And then I can hit delete. I just deleted everything except that object, the objects that were locked. Okay, so locking gives you ultimate protection. They're still visible on the screen. You can snap to them, but you can't select them. So you can't delete, you can't trim, you can't do other things, okay? It gives you ultimate protection, but it still allows you to have visibility. You can still see them, okay? All right, is everybody okay with that? So since this object is locked here, I can still snap to it. So if I want to draw a circle to the center of that object, I can still select center, select that object, and notice it's snapped to that object's center. Okay? So locking it gives it ultimate protection. Okay? So we're going to take a look now at what we call transparency. Okay? Transparency. So here's what I want you to do. Let's go ahead and unlock the layers. If you've got layers locked, go ahead and unlock them. And we're going to go to layer 0, make that current. And what I'm going to do is draw a donut at a pretty good diameter across a couple of these objects. And we're going to see what's happening here. So I want you to go to the donut command. Choose 0 for the inside diameter. And just pick a point, like say from that side to that side to define that diameter. And then we're going to place that donut like right there and maybe one right here. Okay. Can you see the objects behind that donut? You can? You can see the object behind the donut? Seriously? Well, okay. Maybe you played with, did you play with transparency? You shouldn't be able to see them, right? Shouldn't be able to see them. Let me look at yours a minute. It shouldn't be working that way. Oh, you know, let's see. You put that on a layer that has a line type on it. Let's open that up. Click on that layer there. You put layer 0. Okay, you got that. Okay, you shouldn't be able to see anything now. I just get 2 points for the diameter before I find out this point. Okay. All right. So I'm going to show you 2 things. One is not transparency, but the other one is. Okay. So these objects don't have any z value to them. In other words, the red one is no higher than the green one, which is no higher than the magenta. These are all on the same plane, including the white donut. But why can't I see the things on this? Anybody take a guess? It has to do with how you drew them. I drew this first, and then that second, and that third. So there's a time difference. So whatever's the last thing you drew is on top of everything else, even though they're really not separated. Okay, does everybody get that? So there's something that we call draw order happening there. So watch what happens. Click on your donut and right click, and you get this shortcut. And one of the options about right in the middle is this guy that's called draw order. If we take and send that object to the back, notice what happens now. What happened? You can see him now. This isn't transparency, though. This is draw order. It's a little bit different. I just wanted to show you something here. Okay, you guys see that? And this is pretty cool because if you send this to the printer will see this way, and it will see this one this way. So it'll print it the way it sees it. So you can swap draw order real easily. That's not an aspect of layers. Okay? It's not an aspect of transparency. It's an aspect of when things happened in time. Okay? Right? So I'm gonna do an undo and move that guy back to where he was. Now let's take a look at transparency. If we go to this guy right here, that 0 layer transparency, notice, is set to 0. That means it's completely opaque. If we crank that up to, like, say 50, it's going to make that a little bit transparent. The object will still be on top, but it'll be able to see through. So I'm going to open this up, take it to 50, hit OK, close this box. You notice you can now start to see the objects behind it. I didn't swap the draw order. I changed the transparency. Okay? The closer you are to 0, the less you're going to see behind it. The closer you are to 100, the more transparent it gets. To the fact, if I haven't, you can't set it to 100. 90 is the highest setting. So if I go here, again, I think I can set that up to 90. That's going to be the most transparent it can be. Notice that fades out pretty well. See that? Okay. So that's how transparency works. So I showed you two things. Draw order, which has nothing to do with layers, and then also transparency, which does. Okay. And again, the printer will pick up on transparencies. Okay. So you can print transparencies, or you can choose not to. So I think there's an option that says yes or no on that. Okay. Is everybody okay with that? I'm going to go ahead and crank my transparency back down to 0. All right. So we're seeing how this works now. Notice that one draw order swaps. If I bring that guy to the front, that's what that looks like with a front draw order. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at printing. Okay. So let's go to the printer. We're not going to print anything, but just go to the printer over here, right there. And you'll notice, let's just tell it we're going to go to the printer in the back of the room, or whatever room you're in, and tell it you're going to go letter, tell it to do the extents, tell it to fit the paper, center it, and preview it. So notice basically what you see is what you get, right? Pretty cool, right? All right, go ahead and just hit the escape key, and then we're going to kill this. So what we can do here, we can tell it to have things visible on the screen but not visible to the printer. We can make them invisible, and that's called a no plot option. So let's say we want to see the green objects here while we're working, but we don't want anybody else to see them. That's my dirty laundry. That's what I'm using to work with, but I don't want to give that to anybody else. Okay? So what I'm going to do is go in here, and I'm going to go to that green layer, and I'm going to go to this thing called plot. You just click on that, and you get that little no plot symbol that pops up. What that little symbol means, the circle with the line through it. Do not. So now we're going to go hit close. Notice layer green 3 or whatever that is. That's yeah, that's layer 2. That layer is still on, right? Still on, still visible. When we go to the printer, and we tell it to go to the printer, letter, extents, center it, preview it, you'll notice that those objects are gone. Okay? Now I'm going to tell you something. Sometimes people will set up layers, and every layer will be set to no plot. Okay? And they'll go out, they'll be working, and everything's good. Then they get ready to print their drawing, and it's a blank screen. And they'll say, hey, Jim, what's going on here? I don't have any objects. They're on the screen, but they're not on my printer. Preview. Well, we're going to go look at your layers, and guess what? Everything's set, no plot, no plot, no plot. That happens, okay? It can happen real easily. So you have to be careful when you're using no plot options. Okay? Is everybody okay with that? Also in this dialog box, notice there's a plot transparency. So if you want to show the transparency on the drawing the way it shows with the layers, you can toggle that on. If you don't, it'll ignore it. Okay? So that's pretty cool. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and cancel that. All right. Any questions so far? You're going to like layers. Layers are very cool. They're very interesting in how they work. So now we're going to take a look at something called line type scale. And the alias for this is LT scale. So, well, I'll tell you what. Before I do that, let me backtrack. Some of you might have noticed, besides having color and line type right here, right? Did anybody notice over here there's the same thing? Color, line weight, line type, right? Well, these are called object properties. Object properties. The guys that are in the layer manager here, these are layer properties. So color is a layer property, but color is also an object property. Line type is a layer property, but line type is also an object property. Line weight, transparency, transparency. Now, they can't exist simultaneously, right? You can't have a layer that says it's green and an object that says it's red. It won't blend them. One or the other is going to win. Okay? And the way it works is this. Object properties will always override layer properties. I'll say that again. Object properties always override layer properties. So notice what it says for the color up here. What does it say the current color setting is? What's that say? By layer. Line weight, by layer. Line type, by layer. What that means is the property is set such that when you create an object, it's inheriting what the layer says. Okay? That is the way that most CAD operators work. Okay? That is the way most CAD people work because it gives you the most control. All right? Now I'm going to show you something here. We're going to come here. We're going to come up here to this color box, and we're going to set the color to magenta. No longer says by layer. And we're going to come up here to this line type box, the line type box, and we're going to set that to, let's set that to tracks. Okay. Now, set your current layer to layer 2, which should be green and zigzag. Everybody agree? Green and zigzag. That's the current, whoops, I didn't set it. It should say layer 2 up here. Green and zigzag, right? Go out and draw a line. It's not green and zigzag, is it? What's happening there? It's not green and it's not zigzag. It's magenta and tracks. Why is that? Because that's been set to a current setting. So what you're saying is, I want the objects to be these colors, or this line type, or this line weight, and I want you to override the layer. Here's a question. What layer is this thing on? What layer is that on? It's on the layer that was current when you drew it. It's on layer 2. But it's not green and it's not zigzag, right? Right? So watch. I'm going to select that line right there. It tells me it's on layer 2. I'm going to move it to the 0 layer. All right? Here's the problem. This object right here is on layer 2. That's on layer 2. That's on layer 0. That's on layer 2, and that's on layer 2. And you cannot tell that because the color and the line type doesn't help you tell that at all. All right? Everybody see that? This is what we call a mess. You don't want to do this, okay? My suggestion is never set your objects up to specific colors, line types, anything. What we typically always want to do is make sure that this says by layer, and that says by layer. So you typically want everything to be by layer, okay? But notice by setting that up there, that didn't fix these. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to fix the properties of those objects. So I'm going to show you the object properties dialog box. Object properties, okay? So we're going to pick on the objects that we want to change. Those guys and those guys, all right? Right click and go to properties. So this is your properties dialog box. And this is a really cool box because you can change properties of those objects, color, layer, line type, plot style, transparency. You can hyperlink an object. What's hyperlinking? Anybody know? What's hyperlinking? It's a way of adding an address to a web page in the internet. So you could actually hyperlink this. If that line was, let's say, some kind of electrical conduit that you wanted the manufacturer to show up on, you can hyperlink it. have a hyperlink on that. Somebody can click on the hyperlink and it will take you right to the manufacturer's information. So we can hyperlink it. We can give a thickness, but we can also do some cool things like change geometry. So if you had a circle, you could change its diameter, its radius, whatever. Okay, but in here, notice where it says color, and it says what? Magenta, right? Open that up, set that back to by layer. So notice when I did that, it fixed that over here. Go to the line type, go to the line type, and that line type says tracks. Open that up and set that back to by layer. And then when you're done, close the box, hit the escape key. And notice what it did. It brought it back to the proper layers. It fixed everything. Okay? Yes? Question? Hold on a minute. This is a fan. Really noisy. Go ahead. The command that I brought up to do that, that's called the properties command. So if you click on an object and then right click. So the question was how do I get that? How did I get that properties dialog box up? I'm going to show you two ways to do it. One way is to just click on an object and then right click. At the very bottom of the shortcut, you'll see properties. Select that and that'll open up that dialog box for you. You guys see how that works? Properties. Did that work? Here's another way. If you go up to this properties dialog box or the panel, notice there's a little arrow that kind of goes down to the southeast. If you click on that, that will also pop up that dialog box for you. So you can either select an object, right click, properties, or you can hit that little down facing arrow and that'll get your properties. Okay? There's some really cool stuff in that properties box. Really cool stuff because it allows you to edit geometrics as well as things like color, line type, line weight, those good things. Okay? All right? Okay, so what I was talking about before I thought about properties was the line type scale. So if you notice there's spaces in this line and they're a certain size. The size of the zigzag, the size of the word gas, the size of the spacing. That is impacted by something that's called the LT scale, line type scale. The alias for that is LTS. So let's just type in at the keyboard LTS. LTS. What's your current scale factor? It should be 1. If you look at the bottom of my, it says it's 1. That's a multiplier. That is a number that multiplies these guys right here. If you go greater than 1, it makes the spacings bigger. If you go less than 1, it makes them smaller. So if I type in 2 and hit enter, you notice how everything got bigger by 2 times. Right? If I make it too big, I'll lose my line type. Watch. LT scale, 10. Notice some of the line types disappeared because it was too big to fit on the line. Okay? If you go the other way, less than 1, it makes them smaller. LT scale, 0.5. LT scale, 0.05. Okay? So you can adjust that scale factor setting. Kind of a rule of thumb that you use is whatever the scale factor is of your drawing that you're going to print, that's the scale factor you use for your line types. That's not 100% across the board true, but it's a good starting point. So for instance, drawing 4 that you guys are potentially starting or working on right now, that's a 40 scale drawing. So your LT scale should probably be set to 40. No higher than that. In fact, I would probably go down to 20 maybe. Okay? But that's a good point of reference. Okay? Whatever the scale factor is in the drawing, that's kind of a good starting point. Now here's the weird thing about this. I'm going to set this back to 1. This is kind of tricky. There's actually 2 scale factors in AutoCAD that affect lines. This one at the command line, which is called the global scale factor. And then you have an object scale factor. Okay? So you have two LT scale factors. The global LT scale factor and the object LT scale factor. And they multiply each other. And the product of those two is the actual scale factor that it multiplies the line type with. Okay? All right? So if your object scale factor is 0.5 and your global is 2, 2 times 0.5 gives you 1. So your actual scale factor is 1. Okay. Here's what most people do. And again, I'm not going to say everybody does this because people play with them they shouldn't. Line type, scale factors for the objects should typically be set to 1. So then all you're doing is just adjusting the global. 5 times 1 is 5, 6 times 1 is 6. Okay, so it always stays whatever you're doing it globally. All right? But if you mess with the scale factor on the object, then you're going to change it up. So if you click, for instance, if I click on this object right here and right-click and go to Properties, do you notice there's a line type scale right there? Okay, that's the object line type scale. So if I set that to 0.5, it's always going to be 0.5 times whatever the global is, and that's how it's going to affect that object. Okay. Rule of thumb, always leave that set to 1. Always leave it set to 1. Okay. And right now it is. I'm going to show you where that setting is. Excuse me. Dry. All right, I'm going to close this. Type in the word line type, L-I-N-E-T-Y-P-E, line type. And the line type manager should show up. Okay? So we kind of already used that when we loaded line types. If you notice, there's a button here that says show detail, show details. Click on that. At the bottom, at the lower right-hand corner, it shows you global scale factor and current object scale factor. Always leave the current object scale factor in this box set to 1. So that means every time you create an object, it's automatically creating it with a factor of 1. And this one, we just type in LT scale with the keyboard, we set it, and we go. Okay, that's the best way to handle it. Is that good for everybody then? See that? That gets a little confusing. Trust me, I know it's a bit different. Okay, it's just a bit different. So we're going to go ahead and close this box. We're going to take a look at what we call line weights. And I don't use line weights too much, but I just want to show you that they do exist. If you type in line weight, L-I-N-E-W-E-I-G-H-T, and hit enter, this guy will pop up. It's called your line weight setup dialog box. Notice it's either set to millimeters or inches. Okay. And you really have no choice what you use. You can just select. So for instance, if I go to inches, notice I can go from basically 0 line weight up to 0.083. Okay, that's 1 inch. Or that's 0.83 of an inch. But if you did it, never mind. All right, so you can go from those, but you can't. Notice you can't have 0.5 or 0.05. Okay, you can't just put your own in there. You have to pick from that list. Okay. So this is like weights are on a polyline, kind of. And what it'll do is it'll confer those on whatever line, whatever layer you're on. Okay. Also, I want you to notice there is a current value for what's called the default line type. Notice the default line type has a value of 0.01 inch. Okay. You never want to use a line weight of 0 because if you put a line weight of 0, that printer can't see that line essentially. It's like making it invisible. So that's why they always have a default of some value that's usually 0.01 inch. Okay. All right, that's your default setting. Also, if you want to display the line types on the screen, which I don't like because number one, they don't really look like they will on the paper. But if you want to see them, you toggle on this little box right here. And you usually have to adjust this up so you can see them. And if you hit that OK, do you notice mine got a little thicker? There, they got a little thicker, but that's not exactly how they're going to print. So it gives you an idea. I don't like to draw with line weights turned on. So I usually keep them turned off. Okay. In fact, I don't typically use line weights that much. Okay. I just don't. I usually do pretty much everything with colors and line types. But line weights are another option out there. And for instance, if you want to call attention to something, you make it bolder. Okay, so you give it line weight. So you give it line weight at a certain color and a certain line type, your attention is going to be focused on that. And that's important. Okay, that's important when you draw, right? So you can adjust your line weights that way, right? So I'm going to turn those off because I don't like that personally. So I'm just going to kick my display off, set that back to a normal setting. But remember, whatever you have set there doesn't really affect how it prints. Okay? So that's just a visual thing. That's a visual thing. Okay, questions so far? We doing all right? Pretty straightforward? We're going to be utilizing layers from now on. And so layers are really important in CAD. And so it took us a while to build up to that point. We could have done them earlier on, but I like to hit geometry first. Now this is getting into the fact where you're starting to make your drawing pop out. Let's make it a big deal. This is a cool one here. This guy's called match props. Match props right up here. What this allows me to do is select an object with properties that I want, and I can make the other object match that. So if I go to match props, I select the object, which is the source object. And then I come over here and hit the destination, and notice it just changes it. Changed it the color, the line type, the line weight. What's really cool about this is you can come down here to settings, and you can tell it, I want you to match the color, but I don't want you to match the layer. Or I want you to match this, but I don't want you to match that. So you can toggle things off or on. That's a really handy little device, especially when you get into certain things like, for instance, dimensioning. When we do dimensioning, which we'll talk a little bit about in a couple of weeks, that's a really key thing, match props. Okay, so that's a good thing. Any questions? Okay, yes. What's that? Didn't work? Okay. So, did you go to match props? Yeah. So let's just go. All right, now, I'm over here. Okay, it works. It's fine. Change the one property to the other property. Yeah? All right. So layers, create layers, all right? We can add layers. We can even delete layers. I didn't talk about this. Let's go over here. Go into your layer dialog box. Okay, so besides creating the layers, moving things, setting up colors, I can delete layers. However, if I'm going to delete a layer, objects cannot be on that layer. So you can't delete a layer that's current, you can't delete a layer that has objects on it, and you cannot delete the zero layer. Okay? So let's do this. Let's go ahead and set layer 1 current. Set layer 1 current. And let's then come in here and freeze everything except the current layer. So we're going to freeze 0, 2, 3, and 4. So layers 1 is current, and I froze everything else. I'm going to now select all these guys and delete them. All right. So now there is nothing else. There's nothing else on layer 1. What you might want to do this actually is E and then all. Okay. So just make sure there's nothing on that layer. Come back here now and turn these guys back on and make one of the other layers current, like layer 0. Okay. So if I have gotten rid of all the objects on a layer and I want to get rid of that layer, I can now go over here. Notice there's a little X there. You click on the layer you want to delete, and then you hit that layer, and it took it out. So if you try to do that with a layer that had objects on it, it wouldn't let you. If you try to delete a layer that's current, it won't let you. If you try to delete the 0 layer, it won't let you. Okay, so there's some things about that that are good. It's good that you can't just delete any layer you want, because that means you could just delete your whole drawing. Okay. All right. Any questions? Yes.
I think, can't remember, like, this.
The current layer. Mm-hmm.
And those.
See that you got some unlocked. So see the locked ones. You might want to no, you're locking them. Unlock them. There you go. Now you can manipulate things. If you were trying to delete things before, it wouldn't have let you because they were locked. Oh, that might have been your issue. Okay. I'm almost going to guess that was your issue. Let me know. Okay. All right. Anything anybody can think of? Okay. Well, we're going to take a look at text. Okay. You guys want to take a quick break or not? Take a quick break? Okay, let's take a quick break. I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to check in with my other group, and then I'll come back. Okay. So this is, all right. Okay, I think the recording's zoomed back on. Let's see, just make sure. Okay, it is recording. Okay, so we're going to take a look at text. And text is a little different in AutoCAD. Text objects are just like any other object. They're a little bit more intensive than, say, like a line object or this kind of object. There are two types of text objects, what we call single line text and multi-line text. So they just call them text and detext. And we find these guys in the Home tab under the annotation panel. And notice right here, there's text, and they have multi-line text that's sometimes referred to as M-text. And then that's single line text, which is just text. So we're going to look at just the single line text today and show you a couple things about that. So associated with a single line text is something that's called a style. And the style drives how this text looks. Okay. So the text has a style associated with it, which we'll take a look at. It also has what are called text insertion points. So if you go to week 5, I have this guy in there now, text alignments. So let's take a look at this. So if you're used to like Word, all right, Word or Excel, when you align text, there's 3 types of alignments you can use. They have what's called left justified, center justified, and right justified. Okay. But with AutoCAD, they kind of decided they needed a whole lot more. So what they have basically is a line that runs across this at the bottom of the text. That's called your baseline. There's a line that runs across the top of the text. That's called your top line. Is it not working?
Can't see anything.
Crap. I was afraid of that. I don't know what I did here.
It just shows this.
Yeah, okay. That's good. Let's see. Share it. I think it's working now. Okay. Go let me know. Okay. Sorry about that.
Yep.
I was afraid that was happening. I'll be right with you. or something. That's our. All right. Okay, so we have a baseline. This is the baseline. We have the top line, and we have below, these guys that go below the baseline are called descenders. So descender, like notice the lowercase p, this is called your bottom line. And then on the left side, you have the left line, the right line, and the middle line. So where a top line crosses a left, a center, or a right, you get one of these things called a justification. So this guy here is called top left, top center, top right. Then we have middle left, middle center, middle right, left, center, right, and then bottom left, bottom center, bottom right. Okay? So instead of 3 like you have in Word, you have all those in AutoCAD. Height in AutoCAD is defined as the distance from the top to the baseline. And that would be in whatever unit you're working in. It could be in inches or feet or decimal or whatever. Now, if you're used to Word, they don't use that. They use points, like 14 point, 12 point. So 1 point is about 1/72 of an inch. So it's a different system, okay? All right, so if we go back over to AutoCAD, I'm going to go ahead and just clean up the junk here. Text will take on color. It will not take on line type, and it will not take on line weight, so it ignores both of those. Now, that's not true with all text. There are a couple, I think, that do take that on, but the majority of them don't, okay? So if we're going to place a piece of text, and if you have a layer, I got layer, let's say 3 here. I'm going to go up here to text, and I'm going to use single line text, okay? So the first thing it's going to ask me is to establish a start point. So that start point, notice it says down here, it says it's left justified. If I don't want it to be left justified, I would change the justification first. If I'm okay with left, then I can change it later. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click right there. You can click anywhere. Next thing it's asking me is the height. Remember, this is the distance from the baseline to the top line. Okay, so mine's 0.2. I'm going to change that to 0.25, just make it a little bit bigger. Then it wants to know the rotation angle. So the rotation angle is the rotation of the baseline. So if you want the text to go this way, that's a 0 rotation. If you want it to go this way, that's a 90-degree rotation. Okay, so you can change that angle. I'm going to just accept 0. And then you just type it in. So we're going to type in our name. Notice when you're in text, the space bar now actually acts as a space bar. Okay? Normally it acts like the enter key. When you're done typing that line, just hit enter and it'll drop you to the next line, much like a word processor typewriter would do. AutoCAD 2020. And then when I get done, I hit enter again, and this is EMET 110. Hit enter again, and enter one more time. So notice this is all lined up. It's all left justified. How many objects do I have here? Does anybody know? Do I have 1 object or do I have 3? I have 1, 2, 3. Each line is its own object. Even though they were created at the same time, each line is its own object. That's where it gets the term single line text. So each line can either be a single character or 1,000 characters, but it's still going to be one object. But once you go to the next line, that's another object, then another object. Okay, get the idea? Does this font look familiar to anybody? This is a typical Windows font. This is called Arial. Okay, so if you're used to that, this is called an Arial font. All right, so let's take a look at why this is using Arial. Now, the reason is because there's a command out there called style, and style sets up the properties for the text that you're generating. Okay, so we're just going to type in the word style, S-T-Y-L-E, and hit enter, and we get this text style dialog box that pops up. So what we're looking at are properties of the text style. The text style has a name. This name is called standard. The font that it's using is the font name. If you use a particular type of font, then you will get this thing called a font style. And some won't use that, so that just depends. Height, this is called a fixed height indicator. A width factor, and then an obliquing angle. Those are your major properties, okay? So the style name can be anything you want it to be, all right? 1, 2, 3, ABC, standard, whatever. But this guy right here, the font name's important. If you open up that font name, you'll notice there are several different types of fonts in there. If it has a TT in front of it, that's called a true type font. And those are basically Adobe fonts that Windows uses, okay? If you scroll down through that list, you will see another little symbol pop up. Looks like that's one bold, SHX. That's an AutoCAD proprietary font. That's called a shape file. S-H-A-P-E, shape file. So at one time, AutoCAD could not read true type fonts. So they had their own fonts, okay? So now they have both, okay? We can use both. If you use a true type font, then you will have a font style, italicized, bolding. If you use a shape file, you will not have that ability to italicize it or bold it or that kind of stuff, okay? So it's a little bit limiting. All right? The height, you've got two choices here. You either set it to 0 or you put a fixed value in there. Okay? If all of the text in your drawing is always the same height, well, then it's kind of nice to set it to a fixed value. But if you want to be able to have a flexibility of setting it while you place it, then you want to set it to 0. As a matter of fact, I'm going to recommend you use 0 most of the time because that will impact other things like dimensions and liters, okay? If you don't set that to 0, it'll give you problems down the road, okay? So I would say 99% of the time, you want this guy to be set to 0, okay? Width factor, all right? You can think that that letter A is in a box, and this is a height to width factor. So the width and the height is a 1-to-1 relationship. So in other words, if it's a quarter this way, it's a quarter that way, 1-to-1. Notice if we change that width factor to 2, notice what it does. It elongates it in the width and shortens it in the height. So now it's 2-to-1, right? If we go the other way, 0.5, it's going to be narrower in the width and taller in the height. Okay? So unless you're going for a particular look on your fonts, I would probably leave it 1-to-1. Okay? So again, just probably leave it 1-to-1. The obliquing angle is kind of cool. Obliquing slants your text either forward if it's a positive oblique or backwards if it's a negative oblique. Straight up and down, if you're going that way, that's 0. Forward oblique would be this way. Negative oblique would be that way. So if I type in 30 degrees, notice how it slants. 50 degrees, it's slanted even more. Technically, 90 degrees should slam it down to the ground, but it won't. There's a maximum. If I go to negative obliquing, negative 45, notice what it does. Okay? Again, unless you're doing something for a particular reason, don't mess with it. Okay? All right, so styles only exist in your drawing, much like layers. Once you create them, they're only part of that drawing. So we're going to create a couple of styles and then show you how they work, okay? So what I want you to do, well, I'll tell you what, let's just cancel out of this box, and we're going to come back into it. So we're going to go into Style again, S-T-Y-L-E. We're going to create a new style. So you come over here to this New button, and it automatically just calls it style 1. You can accept that if you want. So you'll notice over in the new styles box, it shows you a new style, style 1. So we're going to go and grab a new font. And let's grab one called Simplex. Simplex, and it's a .shx. So when you see the .shx, that tells you that is a compiled shape file. Okay. This is an AutoCAD file. You might notice now that the font style is grayed out. See that? That's grayed out. We're going to leave the height at 0. We're going to leave the width at 1. We're going to leave the obliquing. Here's what you have to do, though, once you set this up, because if you don't do this, you haven't really created the style correctly. You must go down to the apply box and hit that. Once you do that, then you know that you've created that style correctly, okay? All right, we're going to make another style. We're going to go to New, Style 2. Let's find another style. We're going to call it Times New Roman. Times New Roman. Times New Roman. Now this one, I can make that bold italic. I'm going to leave the height at 0, the width at 1, the obliquing at 0, and I'm going to apply it, and I'm going to close this box. So now we have 3 styles in this drawing: standard, style 1, style 2. And the last style that we used, okay, is now current. Or the last style that we created, I should say, not that we used, okay? Now, if we go to this guy right here, annotation, notice there's a text styles right there. If you open this guy up, you'll see the text styles that we have in this drawing. Standard, whoops, style 1, style 2. So let's make style 2 current by clicking on that, and it should tell me that that's style 2. And we're going to come over here, and we're going to do another piece of single line text. So I'm just going to pick a point. Let's do this. Let's do something a little different. Let's go back into that. So this time, instead of doing left justified, I want to do it center justified. So I'm going to come down here to style. Oops, I'm sorry. Let's do that again. I went to the wrong button. I want to do justify. Justify now has all your justifications, left, center, right. So let's do what's called middle center, and that's MC, middle center. So we're going to pick a point. We'll leave the height at 0.25, the angle at 0, and let's again type in the same thing we did before. Your name, AutoCAD, and the EMET 110. Hit enter twice, and notice the difference in the look. This is an Arial font. This is a Times New Roman font that's bold and centered, or bold and italicized, excuse me. You notice how the alignment is different? This was left justified. This is now aligning up center justified. And notice when I click on the text, see the little blue boxes there? That's your justification point. Okay. All right, has everybody seen how this works? All right, let's do one more. So we're going to go back here to annotation, open the style up, make style 1 current, do the same thing now. I'm going to go into style, pick a point, accept the height, accept the rotation, and you can see this looks a lot different. I think you get the idea. Okay? So really that's kind of all there is with text. The style is pretty important. Placement, very important. Changing things on text is pretty easy. If I want to make this text, look like this, I can click on that text. I can right click, I can go to properties and notice all the properties for text. I can change the contents. I can change the style from style 1 to, or 2 to 1. I could change the height to 0.5. I could change the width factor to 0.5. So you can do a lot of stuff with the properties once you have text laid down. Okay? But in general, what you want to do is drive most of your text with your styles. Okay? So styles do most of your work. Because what's really cool, if you change your style, it'll change your text automatically for you. Okay? So it's kind of like a layer in that respect. Okay? Any questions on that? Everybody see how that's working? Okay, let's take a look at editing text. If you want to edit text, it's real simple. You just double click on it. And that'll take me to this editor box right here. And what this allows me to do is just change the new spelling. Okay. So I can add characters or delete characters. So if I don't want my name to be James, I want it to say Jim. Come down in here, change that to Jim. Click out of it, hit the escape key. That makes it real simple. If I'm now using AutoCAD 2021, make that 2021. Okay. This is EMT section 001. Okay. So those are real easy things. All you got to do, you just double click the text and you can change it. So the only thing you can change there though is the content. You can't change the height, the font, or any of that. You got to do that through properties. Okay. Double clicking it is called text edit, and all it does is it changes that real simply. Okay? Any questions? All right. A couple more things and we'll be done here, and then I'll let you guys work. Spell. There's a spell checker in AutoCAD. Probably a real good idea, because if you guys are like me, that's not the best speller sometimes, or I bang stuff out really quick. It's probably always good to spell check. So all you have to do is type in the word spell, hit enter. It'll ask you what you want to spell. So I usually do the entire drawing. You just do a start, and what it'll do is it'll pick up just like it does in Word, and it says, hey, you got this word EMET. I don't know what it means. Do you want to change this or not? Just ignore it. No, I don't want it, or ignore all. And then it does it. Okay, so it's probably, in my opinion, I know I tell you guys to do this, and I forget to do this every time. Try to get in the habit of doing a spell check before you print. Okay, because usually what I'm going to do is I'm going to print my document out, and I'm going to get it from the printer, and the first thing I'm going to see is, oh, I just misspelled this word. So now I have to go in and fix it and then reprint it. It's just a waste of paper, right? So if you can spell check before you do that, that's a good thing. So there's a couple other system variables here. One is called QText. It stands for quick text. Just type in the word QText, Q-T-E-X-T, and hit enter. So what this will do is replace all of the text in your drawing with rectangles. And the reason it does that is because text is an intensive kind of thing. So you can speed up the regens and that kind of stuff by visualizing your text as rectangle placeholders. That way you won't draw through your text, but you can speed things up. So if we QText this, type in QText and turn it to on, and then hit enter, nothing changed, right? So you have to regen your screen. Just type in RE and hit enter. You notice what it did now. That's QText to text. So what you see is what the printer will see. So if you send this document right now to the printer, that's what the printer is going to do, just a bunch of rectangles. But what this does is keeps me from, if I'm drawing in this area, it keeps me from drawing through the text, but I don't have to look at the text. Okay? Everybody see that? So that's called a QText option. So if you want to turn it back off, go into QText, turn it off, and then you must force a regen, RE. Okay? So there's one other variable that's kind of neat, and it only affects true type fonts. So the true type is the one to the left, to the right, and then top two, that top James Decker AutoCAD, and that James Decker there is is not a true type. Those are shape files. So we're going to do what's called a text fill. And if you turn the text fills off, your text won't look like it's filled. It'll look like a hollow shell. Okay? But you can't say this text is that way and this isn't. It's got to cross the board. So the command is text fill, TEXT-FILL. Hit enter. Currently it's 1, which means it's on. If we want it off, we set it to 0. Okay, so I'm going to set it to 0. Hit enter. Regen it. Nothing happens, did it? All right, but it really did. If you go to the plot dialog box, let's go to the plotter. Select your printer. Let's see, I'm going to grab my printer. Letter, extents, fit it, center it, preview it. Okay. Mine's not showing up. Hold on, I know what I did. Remember what I told you? If you set your printer to no print, I just did. So that's why mine didn't show up. Hopefully yours is showing up. Let me do that again. Center it. There we go. So you notice that I'm getting hollow shells right there. This text is not being affected because it's a shape file. Shape files ignore text fill. True types, that's a true type. That's a true type. Okay? So notice what's kind of nasty about this variable is you don't see it on the screen, but you see it in the printer. Okay? And once you turn that guy off, he stays off. I can't tell that this is off. Okay? Everybody with me on that? So let's go ahead and fix that because you probably don't want it as a shell. So make sure you set that back to a 1. Okay? And that's it. So the assignment that we're going to be working with next is going to be dealing with layers, lots of geometry, and text. So I don't think anybody's ready for this 5th assignment yet. So what we want to try to do is concentrate on getting 3 and 4s done. Okay. I do have 2s marked up. I just didn't get a chance to finish them, so I will have those guys back to you for Tuesday. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. I'm going to